The trail is a metaphor for change. Although hiking, and specifically endurance hiking, is now a big part of my day-to-day, it's not just about exercise. It's about transformation. Each step is a movement towards clarity, purpose, and identity. But movement is one thing, sharing insights gained is another. As a U.S. Marine veteran, I created this space to help other veterans gain clarity, purpose, and identity. Let's walk this path together. This is Trail to Transformation. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Of course, my name is Dr. Keith McNally. I'm here with Suzanne, and I got to say an apology, Suzanne, because when we did the very first episode, I forgot to really allow you to tell everybody who was watching the show who you are. So I need to go ahead and do that before we even get started with the conversation, because this is a real important conversation for both of us. Tell our audience who you are.
Why, thank you. That's so funny because I didn't even notice. We were so excited to have our conversation. We just forgot that people need to know who we are to be interested to listen to us. But I hope you found that conversation interesting and all the ones that have been shared since then. I'm Suzanne Jabour. I'm a grief guide and educator. And I come to that work after the death of my son, Ben. He died in September of 2020. And I choose to say that he died of mental health challenges, of depression and anxiety. But you'll find out in this conversation that, of course, the means of his death was by suicide. And I now take everything I've learned in the just over 5 years since he died and use it to really demystify grief for people who are grieving and the people trying to support them. And so I'm thrilled to be here having this conversation with you.
Suzanne, I do appreciate that. And the reason I wanted to add that to this conversation is because we've had many conversations over Zoom and outside of the studio that really talk about at the moment where somebody makes that decision, whether to live, whether to not live, lots of things are going on. There's lots of variables involved. There's um, people, loved ones who may not be aware of what's going on. There's tertiary circumstances. For me, it was a loss of job and loss of identity, and that was including all 5 times. And so, to the point where I could have even lost my house. And so, one of the questions that you had asked me was, you know, could have anybody said anything to make the decision one way or the other? Could they have changed it? Could they have impacted it? What's really going on? And I said, no. Everything that's going on is going on so deep that I'm not thinking about, my daughter or things that are going on around me. All of that becomes such a fog because I'm living in fear, I'm living in frustration, I'm living in an unknown space, even though I've been there several times, and there
Mhm.
never seems to be a way out or something that I could just turn to say things can and should be different. Now, for me, I've chose non-lethal, not to be graphic. Like I didn't have a gun, I don't carry weapons. So the methodology that I've chose, maybe subconsciously, was a way of staying
Mhm.
alive.
Mhm.
But I wanted to have that conversation because many veterans and non-veterans who are faced with this circumstance of that choice, they need some insight. And you as a grief educator, somebody who has processed through a lot of emotion yourself because of your own loss of your son, you may be able to help us out. And so I turn to you and say, help us out, please.
Well, and it's such an interesting conversation because I think for me, with a sort of healthy, typical brain, it's very hard for me to understand a circumstance in life where that choice and that decision makes sense. And I think that's where we really struggle around suicide and ideas of, people making this choice. Because to me, in my healthy brain, it's not a choice. Like, it's not even on the list of possible things I could do, even when I'm in my most despairing state. And so I think what's really important for us to understand is that it's not a healthy brain that's making that decision, right? It's likely a combination of things. It's likely a combination of brain chemistry and trauma and all of the things that we know sort of feed into this soup of, really, as you describe it, which is so helpful to me and I think so critical for both suicide loss survivors and people struggling with mental health to hear, is that it's that process where you become completely inwardly focused and all you can see is the despair. You can't see your daughter, right? You can't see the things that might tether you to here and to making a different choice and having a different outcome. I do think it's really important to talk about, sort of access to lethal means, right? This is where the risks of, and I don't want to get on a gun platform, but there are risks to having firearms in the home, for example, because what might have been someone's attempt becomes completion because of the means that are available to them. So it's so many things for us to think about and be aware of. And I think the other piece of it that's so important, and I know you and I have talked about before, is that idea that there's supposed to be something that I could have done. And when we understand your perspective, which is how internal that decision became and how much all you could see was what was going on inside for you, my perspective is the sort of the other side, which is I did everything. If you look at that checklist, and Suicide Prevention Month was not, I can't remember what month that is, but it was not long after Ben died. And I remember one of his best friends saying to me, if I see one more of those, like the 10 things you should be doing so that your friend doesn't die by suicide, I need to scream, because she looks at that list and goes, yeah, yep, we were doing all of those things. When Ben died, he didn't have any indicators. None of his usual tells were present, because over the years that he struggled with his mental health, I had become kind of tuned into his tells when I would have to be paying attention and really watching out for his mental health and having conversations with him about it. None of those were on display. He had not withdrawn from his friends or family. He had not started to give away belongings. Like, all of the things you're supposed to watch for, none of those were present. And all of the things you're supposed to do, we were all doing. So we were all reaching out to him. We were all staying in contact. As I got to know his friend circles and know how in touch he was with them right till the very end, it's really interesting to have that realization that, yes, we need to do everything we can to understand suicide better, to create connection, to be doing all of those things on the list. And sometimes that's not enough. And that's okay too. And I know for lots of people that might be hard to hear. And I have come to a place where I'm okay with that, because it's a truth. And your truth might be slightly different. But for me, I know I did everything I knew how to do. We had accessed every resource that was available to us. We had made every decision we could that kept him as healthy as we could for as long as we could. And ultimately, his depression and anxiety turned out to be terminal. And there was nothing I was supposed to do to fix that. We don't have that expectation. No one would expect me to have cured his cancer. But somehow, when it comes to mental illness, we're supposed to have been able to cure it. So there's so many pieces that we need to break apart and break down and understand differently for us to achieve, our bigger goals of taking suicide off the table, of having that not be in Ben's demographic, 18 to 25-year-old males, I think at the time, and maybe still, was the second leading cause of death, like after car accidents or something. It's very high up,
Mhm.
and that's not okay.
And that's consistent with, my mission and vision to, um, for veterans, have that number be zero, because the Veterans Administration has published data periodically. I think currently it's 17 and a half, on a daily basis by average, veterans take their own life. But you said something earlier that I wonder about now, because you said there were tells, there were signs that may be indicative that somebody's leaning in this direction. And I always wonder if were there signs for me. I'm not
Mm,
reflecting back and like from a mirror. And I say that because I live a rather isolated life. I live in this house. I do have now my best friend over here, Ashley. But she's not trained to look at those kind of tells, those kind of signs. Um,
yeah.
for me, it was pure isolation.
Mm,
Always doing things on my own. I'm, in our first conversation, I told you I was a misfit. I never really fit into, different types of groups. So I lived a lot of my life, even as a Marine and beyond that time frame, on my own. I did things on my own. I still do things on my own. Hiking miles at a time is a kind of an individual effort. I do it, like I said, she's my trail partner, but it's an individual effort. I don't know if there were, other than, going to cry in the closet, I don't know if there were tells. I don't know if there were signs that says, something's really wrong and we really need to take a look at that. Um, so how does that fit into your narrative?
well, I mean, I think that's a big tell, right? If you're going to cry in the closet, then that's an indicator that all is not well,
Yep.
right? And all is not well at a different level than the sort of normal ups and downs of life. And it's interesting, I think for me as a mom, so Ben started struggling with his mental health when he was very young. He had his first suicidal ideation when he was 10. So I had been on watch for a long time and started to see, oh, okay, so one really big tell for him was around his clothes. He loved fashion, loved fabulous designer, expensive clothes, as well as his cheap and cheerful. He was very much a, blend the high and the low together kind of a guy. And if I peeked into his room and there were clothes on the floor, I knew all was not well. And so it's the things I think maybe as a parent that you're observing in a different way than certainly I don't know that we can observe those tells in ourselves. I don't know that he would have identified that as something that was an indicator that all was not well. But for me as a parent, I really became attuned to, okay, what kinds of stories is he telling when he comes through the door from work? What kinds of stories is he telling about what happened today or when he went out with his friends or whatever? And Ben 100% was also a misfit, and he had very fortuitously found other misfits and created a band of misfits, which was fabulous. I used to love when he would find another misfit, um, because the misfits often fit together, right? So it was those kinds of things for me that I'd be like, oh, okay. He doesn't want to, if there's something he really loved to do that he would say, like, not be as interested in it as normal. That would be an indicator for me that I needed to be just watchful. And it wasn't that we would then, I would then, go charging in and be like, hey, I noticed this thing. I don't know that he ever knew. We never talked about what I thought were his tells. I would just be on observation mode and opening up conversations about how are you really doing? And we had a language around the pit. We called it the pit when he was in his deepest depression. So I would say, okay, well, how are you in relation to the pit? Are you at the bottom? Are you climbing your way out? Are you hanging on to the top edge by your fingertips? Or are you looking in from the top? So that was my way of kind of being able to assess, like, where is he at? What kind of help do we need to find? Who do we need to reach out to and make an appointment with, right? Do we need to go to the hospital? Because if he's in the bottom of the pit and really can't find a way out of there, then we need to go to the hospital.
Mhm.
So yeah, and I do think it's different as a mom, and maybe it's different as a partner. Like maybe if you had a partner that lived in the home with you, they would kind of create that radar too. For me, it just was a way to be aware of what was happening for him because his mental health experience was so different from my healthy brain experience. So I felt like I wanted all the ways to try and understand it and be able to watch for what might be going on.
I like that you said you developed a language with your son, you know, revolving around this idea of his health, his mental health, and so, and he was able to express, for the most
Mm-hmm.
part, where
Yep.
he was in terms of what you called the pit. Um, can I let me ask you this question: was that something you, as a mom, said we need to have a language, we need to find a way of
Yep.
communicating when you're in trouble, or like we talked about earlier, you followed a bunch of steps, and this was one of those steps. You're going to create this space that you can have those conversations. Where did this language come from?
That's such a very good question. Let me think back. I don't actually, I know he and I talked about it and about having a way for him to be able to ask for the help that he needed and to be able and for us to be able to sort of assess together who might be the best resource. And I don't know, I can't remember if that languaging was our creation between the two of us or if it came up in a conversation with his child psychologist at the time. But we absolutely used that language and would be like, okay, like he would be having a particular struggle or be presenting something that I thought, oh, something's going on. And so I would just ask point blank, okay, where are you in relation to the pit? Like which of these four stages are you at? And he would be able to do an assess and self-assess and say, oh, I'm okay. I'm hanging on the edge, but I can see my way to the top. Or I'm just looking in and so I know I need to go do something or other, whatever it might be, that will help me step away from the edge. Or I'm at the bottom and I'm stuck here and I don't know what to do and I'm worried. And because he had had that suicidal ideation very early, um, we had had those conversations about needing to reach out for help and needing to ask and all of that. And ultimately, when he did die, he hadn't reached out. So again, like we did everything. We had open conversation from when he was very young. We had open conversations until he died. That was in the midst of all the COVID chaos and that weighed on him very heavily. So we were having conversations about how we were all doing. And at that, moment, that planning, his planning process is a little bit different, I think, than yours. It was a little bit longer. And I don't talk about the specificity of how he died because that's just something I choose to keep private. But it wasn't an instant decision, and that to me is also really interesting. That even with all of this scaffolding around, there what that and that's why your information was so helpful. Like he's at that point so internalized that even all of that scaffolding isn't accessible to him.
But I think for those who are watching or listening to this conversation, is being able to create those words, um,
Mhm.
to keep that conversation open and in a
Yeah.
non-threatening way. It's not like you said earlier, you're not trying to invade his space. You were giving him an opportunity in a very calm, very safe way to say, "Mom, this is where I am right now." And it didn't have to be, "This is where I was this morning," or "This is how
Yeah.
life was last week." It's really, "This is how I am right now," because now is important. Now is the most
Hmm.
important time in a person's life. It wasn't what happened 5 minutes ago. It wasn't what happened last night. It wasn't any of that. Where am I right now? If you could kind of have that conversation with somebody, that's so, so important because that's really indicative of what type of help they need. As you constantly, reinforce, do we have the conversation? Do we make him active, do something, or do we need to get him to the hospital? For those who are watching, what words are there specific words, or how would you create this vocabulary of conversation so that we can have conversations with people who struggle?
I suspect that everyone's conversation is going to be slightly different, right? Because when we were setting up that language, he was 10. So I wouldn't necessarily have set up that language, though it's really effective, right? If you think about that sort of darkness of depression, um, it did feel to him like a pit. So that's why we called it that. Um, I think the most important language is the language you can use, right? Because if we get caught entangled in finding the right words or the perfect words or how should I open this conversation, the best way you know how, right? The most non-judgmental, open-ended way that you know how to do is how to start that conversation. Because the other thing I think that happens, and you can help me understand this better from your perspective, but for Ben, for sure, if someone was disingenuous or coming at him with some kind of scripted something they had learned, he was immediately out of the conversation. Like he had no care at all about anything you had to say. If you were the most brilliant healer of all the things, he instantly didn't care. So to me, it's more important to be genuine and open, probably a little bit vulnerable and uncomfortable, and name all of that. I can see there's something going on with you, and it's making me a little bit worried. And I would love to know what's happening for you right now.
I
Simple. Your words are the right ones.
One of the things that has been possibly historically um, a myth is to never use the word. And I've been kind of shy about using the word suicide, even on my own show, because this publishes in different on different platforms, and I'm not quite sure. I don't want it to get flagged. Um, you can use the word in conversations with somebody who is suicidal because they're already thinking it. It's not that you're putting that idea in their head; it's already in their head.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things I like about this conversation is that you weren't afraid. Even though it's been over time, you weren't afraid to have those conversations where many people are. And we've got a couple minutes left before we have to end this particular conversation, but I want to address that very idea is to not be afraid to say something. Do you have any insight in that?
100% agree. Yes, yes, and yes. You are not going to plant the idea. This will likely be something they maybe have contemplated. And if they haven't contemplated it, you saying the word is not going to make them contemplate it. That's not how it works, as best we know at this moment. And you saying it allows them to say it.
Hmm.
Because if they're curious about it or wondering or contemplating or whatever, and you're able to open that conversation, you become a safe place. And what all of us need more of is safe places when we're having these big emotional mental health things happen to us. So if you saying, wow, like I listened to this show the other day and they were talking about this, is that something that you want to talk about? Opens the door for a conversation that is desperately needed.
We have about a minute left because I have to watch the clock here. Before that minute ends, somebody who's on the other side, somebody who's watching a loved one struggle, 20 seconds or less, because I'm watching the clock. What can you tell that person to say? How to open up a conversation that's very difficult to have?
Just start and then let them lead.
Sounds good. I like that. Suzanne, thank you so much. These conversations we'll continue to have on this show. But for everybody else, hopefully this was of benefit to you. And as always, I will see you on the trail. Take care. Imagine a world where every veteran finds a reason to keep going. That's the vision behind the Trail to Transformation Foundation. Help us make it real. Donate through the GoFundMe link. And as always, I'll see you on the trail.